And I'm Richard.
And we've got a big update. There's tons of stuff. We've been working really hard on things, so it's great to have the opportunity just to tell you everything that's happening. With that, since there's so much, let's get into it. First thing
Yep.
we want to talk about, Richard, is the core networking stuff, where we are, where we're going, token persistence.
Yes, I think people have seen a little while ago. I started like sharing little turbo mode memes. Since then, we've been torturing nodes mercilessly in a whole bunch of ways. So part of what we've been doing is pulling together all of the pieces of the puzzle. Automatic transaction rebroadcasting by having a short chain. Block staking, which is that security measure we kind of came up with, or David really came up with last year, that is implemented. So we've been testing that at the same time as having a high throughput of fees and user activity, and checking that that all comes together. And that we have, we don't have any degradation in things like gameplay or video calls or anything because of blocks moving off the chain, et cetera, et cetera. That the data
Yeah.
side of that is working, and then also just that we can do things like recover, because I think people don't maybe have in their heads the difficulty of having a swarm of nodes on an arbitrary piece of chain length. And then if someone new comes along, how do they know that they're getting the right one? If you stop
Mhm.
and you wake up, how long's it been? If you
Yeah.
if you get if you contact someone else on the network, are they giving you blocks? So there's a whole sea of things we have to test
Let,
and run through.
let's pull back. Why does it matter? We're moving to token
Yep.
persistence. Token persistence requires the loop. That means any updates to the software, we need to be able to shut down our nodes, update the software, restart them live without resetting the
Yep.
network. This is what Richard is talking about.
Right. And it's even things, if a node does trip up or something, someone's server goes down, loses connectivity, will it recover? Will it cause
Yeah.
problems to the network? Will it invent
So
money or forget money? That sort of thing.
we've been doing all of this.
Yeah.
Richard's going into deep into the weeds. The good news is work is going forward. What we're expecting
Yeah.
is we're expecting this mostly to be done in the course of a month. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean the work is done. That means we move on to the stuff that
Yeah.
is a problem or usability issues. Practically, in terms of project timeline, if you're
Yeah.
listening, what we're planning to do is we're planning to move production onto a permanent loop in about a month.
Yeah.
And then we're expecting to run that for about 3 months testing live on the network
Yeah.
before we basically pull the trigger and we say, well, if there's no problems, we're going to go into full token persistence.
Yeah.
So if you're tracking progress and you're looking for timelines, that gives us an ETA of about September 1st, where we're expecting to be able to bring other nodes, third-party nodes onto the network and basically essentially have full token persistence, because at that point we're not going to want to restart the chain.
Mm-hmm.
So anything to add to that? I mean, that's kind of the really high-level version of.
No, I mean it's really good. We're months ahead of schedule, about 3 months ahead of where we'd last sort of set out roadmap wise, and that's really just due to the pretty full court press we've been putting on this across the team.
Yeah.
And also because of a few innovations like the block staking we mentioned before, where it gives us a way of having security in this system. But it
Yeah.
does add a bit of
It,
testing for things like the social
it
slashing side
basically
and how we
means
do
that
that.
anybody who attacks the network is going to be bleeding out at least $100 million, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, NFTs, should we move on?
Yes.
So along with the permanent loop, we're making any upgrades to consensus that we need to make. They get a lot harder on September 1st, because on September 1st, it gets a lot more difficult in terms of upgrading the code.
Yep.
If you know the way Bitcoin works, what people normally do is they say, well, okay, at this block ID, this logic is what we use to analyze blocks. And so we need to shift to something like that. We want to get any of the changes in before that.
Yep.
So that includes NFT support, because
Yep.
NFT affects how consensus works. The wallet can now create and it can send NFTs.
Yep.
What is still outstanding for us on this is making sure they're validated properly. And one reason this matters is that NFTs, it's beautiful. In addition to just being, they can be images, text, anything you can put in a JSON file, they can also have an amount associated with them. So it's kind of like they're their own L1 token.
Yep.
They will pay broadcasting fees out of the bound in Saito, out of the bound transaction slip that's
Yep.
attached. But it means you could take an NFT, you can create it, and you can fractionalize it.
Yep.
So you could have an NFT and you could divide it into a million pieces if you wanted to and give each to your friends. You can create 3, split them up among 8 people and say, look, if anyone can reassemble one full NFT, they have the legal
Yep.
right to do something.
Yeah, it
This
gives
stuff,
us. It's interesting because it gives us fungible and non-fungible versions of that, depending on what you want to do with them. So you could just say there's 1,000 game bucks and create
yeah,
them for an in-game
mhm,
token, and they would be fine. Or 20 billion
yeah,
game bucks. I'm not sure what the
yeah,
upper limit would be digits
mhm,
wise. Or you can say the stuff David's saying, where you can actually have. I mean, a game's a great example because it's easy to imagine. You have to
mhm,
assemble the 5 rings of something to have something
yeah,
happen, or you have to have beaten at least so many people and collected enough tokens of that to be able to escalate to the pro league or whatever it is. There's a whole
yeah.
bunch of ways that you can use these tokens. It's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So it's really interesting. That's what's under implementation. What still needs to be done there is we need to make sure the validation is working properly. You guys will remember about a month ago we were looking at things like token supply. We need to make sure it doesn't affect token supply with rebroadcasting. That's what we need to do. We're fully expecting that this will be done within a month. So by the time we start testing production and we start moving it on into an actual permanent loop, we're expecting NFT support.
Yeah.
This also means if you're looking at Saito for NFTs, if you're on one of the Saito affiliated NFT projects, yada, feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah.
We could use your help testing UI components. We've got the UI components for creating NFTs and for sending NFTs. They're getting merged into production and they're being worked on as well.
Yeah, we'd love to see our projects and stuff because the whole things like the minting process, etc. We want to
Yeah,
work out what people really need so we can
yeah.
tweak and improve that.
And for this, I'd say we're 12 plus months ahead of schedule because I don't think anyone was expecting NFTs to be supported by the time we were going live. But yeah, those are the 2 big things that are happening that are kind of invisible to the community on the Rust layer.
Yeah.
The network is moving towards token persistence ahead of schedule. I think within a month moving prod to something, and then 3 months bringing third party onto the network, and
Yeah.
then NFT support, which will allow people to be commercially using the network without even the need to run servers.
Yeah.
Should we move on to Appland,
Yeah.
Richard?
Good.
So a bunch of stuff has been happening on the apps. This is more visible, but unless you're on Red Square and unless you're playing games, you may not know what's happening. Web3 crypto. Why don't you take this one? What's
Uh,
been happening?
Yeah, I mean we've just been hurting everything we can find in terms of pressure testing that. Having a great time. The Eagle game nights are going forward and happening regularly now, and there's a kind of group of people who turn up, and that's becoming its own little thing, which is cool. But we've also been looking at stuff like playing heavy-handed, poker games with Saito staked, etc., just to make sure that all of that is really smooth, etc. So there's still
Yeah.
some bits and pieces of UI work around that, but really confident that that's really in hand. I mean that's obviously also really
Open
important
games,
for.
open tables, open games is a
Yeah,
big one too, where like a lot of the games people are playing on the arcade now, one of the hurdles is people will show up and then they'll be like, oh, I want to play TS, I want to play Settlers. Is anyone else here? With poker, we need, and we've been working on the ability, it's just an open game. You can join, you can leave
yeah,
with Web3 crypto staking happening. So there's a lot of stuff.
yeah,
Dan's been doing a ton of work on this.
yep,
I'll take Red Square. We just had a big upgrade to Red Square, which is actually kind of a tech debt removal problem. What happened with Red Square is that working on it, there was a ton of cruft. There was like 5 ways that tweets were being moderated and curated. There's like 4 or 5 ways they were being loaded. We've reduced this now to 2 kinds of load, one from archives and just one from a server cache. And we've simplified all of curation into one section so that we can know what's happening. We think it's actually, so there's been some instability with Red Square. You may notice, you're like, why is my incognito browser empty? It's empty because we're making changes. This stuff is being improved. We are working on it.
yeah,
And the reason we're working on it is we're actually, the interesting thing is I'm not sure where Red Square goes, because it's leading us away from Twitter and it's leading us more towards like the curated feed is really private, doesn't necessarily update all the time, but the Firehose feed is more of this kind of
Yeah,
uncurated.
I think the realization that mimicking Twitter isn't the best way to take it for its own growth, and also to support the other pieces of the ecosystem that we have, was an important step. And so we kind of, I think, in some ways, you say like paying back a lot of tech debt so we can explore more on what's really working for people. And I
Yeah.
think there've been some steps backwards, but the overall direction I'm really confident in because I can see
I
it
think
being better
I think
for
it
community growth.
unambiguously step forward. If you go to the tweets, for instance, you'll see that there's now an option that lets you show tweet. It lets you show
Yeah.
info of where exactly that tweet came from, why it's on your feed.
Yeah.
So we've added that so that we have visibility into. Because one of the questions is, this is not showing up on my feed. This is showing up on my
Yeah.
feed. Why is that the case?
Right.
And
But I think that
with
comes back to that difference between Twitter, which is a central logic, right? Like the great hall of Twitter holds all the tweets and it meets them out
yeah,
to people as it decides,
yeah,
versus you're part of a community and you have a flow of tweets coming from various sources. And this is partially for us in the first place to kind of get the defaults right, but it's also needed for people to be able to navigate
yeah,
that space, right? So
yeah.
it's I feel like it's taking Red Square to more of where that promise of
It,
decentralized moderation
I mean,
was pointing.
it needs to happen for Red Square to get where the games are going. I don't know how close Red Square is to something that I kind of feel we're at the 80% mark with it, Richard.
Mm.
You know, it's like things kind of need to get to the
Yeah,
90-95% mark. We're not going to know until there's so much happening that we're basically right now, we're kind of in a breather mode where we're trying to evaluate how good is the
yeah.
default.
Well, I think also we're spending 90% of our time plus on token persistence, so there is that. But I think also, we've seen things like what's been a really powerful driver for growth for us, but quiet the Chinese TS community starting to occasionally post on Red Square, and that I think gives us both
Yeah.
like some positive feedback, but also a picture of where growth there really lies, where that's the kind of thing that people will be using it for in the first place. And when it then becomes popular for that, then it might grow into being a more general comms tool for people. So
Building off that, the strategy gaming part, that's where we're seeing the organic growth in the community. I think it's invisible on Twitter, not only because it tends to be more Chinese, but because a lot of the people that are into crypto aren't actually into using crypto applications, which is interesting. It's
yeah,
like, okay, well, with Saito, this is what you're getting. Pay attention, because it's actually wonderful if you are paying attention, because we've got legitimate organic growth. I think it was something like 5% in the last month. And
yeah,
that's not huge, but that's with zero marketing from the team.
mm-hmm.
So what's happening? We've got Here I Stand is going to be going on to the prod server soon. It's debugged to the point where we're not really able to crash the game anymore.
Yeah,
Sometimes we are, but it
you have
looks
to
like it'll
try.
be stable. We're going to be having public games. We've got another game, if you're tracking GitHub, that is closer to TS, which is getting released out there, or will be released maybe in a month, 2 months. We'll see. And that's basically catering to the people who are coming. So another thing is, if you're in the community and you want to help, come, give feedback, help us figure out what changes need to be made, because we're busy, but we're prioritizing the stuff where we can see this is what people want to use.
Yeah.
Um, Moving on, Settlers. There's been some updates. We're not quite sure about them. Dan made changes to
Yep.
two-player
Well,
balance.
there's been some controversy around the new banditry rules. I think actually they make some interesting changes to the game. I'm not sure if they're more interesting to the kind of high level player and maybe harder for the noob, but we'll work that out. Please come along and give us feedback what you think about it. It really is one of the engines of growth on the system, Settlers. So love
The
to hear what people think.
transaction volume in the arcade, it's coming from Poker, Twilight Struggle, Settlers of Satoa, and increasingly Here I Stand. And we're getting the other stuff that's like the solitaire games actually are people playing while they're waiting
Yeah.
for invite to be accepted. So we're getting usage there too.
Yep.
Um, moving on, Settlers Block Explorer. Richard, do you want to mention this? This
Yeah,
isn't a
so
priority. Every now and then someone's like, what's with the Block Explorer? And we're
yeah,
like, when we see people really using the Block Explorer, we'll put more work into it. But
yeah, I
you,
think there's a couple of things. I mean, I started working on a refurb of it for a couple of reasons. One of which was that the original tool, which we built really as a debugger for chain development,
yeah,
um, was missing a few things I wanted for this more in depth pressure testing we've been doing with the turbo mode stuff. Uh, yeah, indications of things quickly does a block have a golden ticket associated with it, etc. So we can
mhm,
see more information that way. That led me to look at kind of trying to give it a more modern UI, mostly so that it's going to work on people's phones if they're trying to look something up quickly.
yeah,
And that I took as an opportunity because we've been talking to different people in the community about building some basic prompts and some context files for Cursor, but for basically any AI dev suite, and to see how much we can use those to give
yeah,
people like Rails and or acceleration when they're trying to build
mm,
apps on Saito. So I've kind of combined all of those things. So
yeah,
step one is getting a sense for how to best get it doing that work. And I think it's actually really powerful because one of the problems we have with onboarding new devs around Saito is often there's the shift from that centralized client server model.
mhm,
And then there's also discovering all the things you can do in a peer to peer world that aren't necessarily obvious. And the
yeah,
AI tools are kind of helpful because they often suggest stuff that they see elsewhere in the code base, which is
yeah,
really helpful because it's not the kind of thing a dev would necessarily reach for and think, I can do that. And you realize, oh,
yeah.
actually, the way the other app does this is to send it in a transaction or to do this.
I
And
think
so it's
I
helpful.
think with gaming too, it's like look at this board and give me the pixel positions of every place you're going to place this tile. Um,
Yep.
but anyway,
So
for the block board, there's been some work on that.
Yep.
I
So
don't
there'll
know.
be a prototype coming out soon. I think we'll just run it next to. We'll have like Block Explorer X running next to the current one for a while, just to see how it's performing. I need to do some cleanup. It breaks some rules right now.
Like to be honest, like as a dev and a user, I'm happy with the current one. I think the big update we're going to need is NFT support. If people are going to go to the Block Explorer to see the NFTs.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
NFTs and also capturing a given transaction, like going back through transaction
mhm,
history, I think is the kind of thing that
yeah,
the things people do on Etherscan, like showing that someone paid you or whatever. So that's
mhm,
in mind when we're doing this work, but really
yeah,
comes into its own again post persistence when people want to do that sort of thing.
yeah. Last thing I've got on the list, we've got UI components, Sato class for creating and sending NFTs. This is if you want to create and send NFTs. If you want to create NFTs, it's a useful time to contact us. The reason, just flagging this, because it kind of sounds devish, is NFTs on Sato are way more flexible than NFTs on other platforms. The reason for this is that the power that the NFT has in an EVM chain like Solana or Ethereum is based on what the smart contract supports. So your NFT is locked down to what that contract supports. Um, there's all this, oh, we've got to audit our contracts because they're all broken and they're all complicated. In Saito, it's basically a JSON file that's attached to the transaction and it's treated as an L1 transaction of sorts. So it's really flexible. We're not really sure what it's going to empower.
Mm.
It's really flexible for things like gaming because we can even do something like there's a game card, the image goes in the NFT, but there's also a bit of code that goes in the NFT too. So you could theoretically do things like actually have your application that runs on Saito dynamically run code that you don't even code if it's owned and attested for by one of the players who owns an NFT in the game.
Yep.
So, how do we build the interfaces that let people create these kind of NFTs? Depends on what they want to do with them. We know what we want to do with them. One
Yep.
of the things I want to do with them with Settlers, for instance, is maybe like if you have an NFT, you can choose to change the way the bandit works.
Yeah. I
You
mean, a
know?
simple thing like, yeah, give it extra powers or remove
Yeah.
the powers that it has when in other people's hands. So, like, not let it be
Yeah.
placed in certain places or
So,
whatever.
or even like the robber handlers, if you've got this NFT, you can choose what the bonus is. We're thinking of NFTs not just in this like crypto way of hey, let's create something and sell it. We're actually thinking of them as ways to provide depth to gameplay so that someone who's playing can be shown, look, there are these collectibles, which you can get for free by just playing, or you can go and buy them
Yeah.
if someone wants to send one to you or whatever. But actually use them to deepen gameplay and make it a much better experience so that advanced players, people who like the game, get way more out of it.
Yeah, I think that and allowing permissions, so like letting people join certain competitions or
Yeah.
leagues or whatever, and then awarding those to people who've won in those leagues, etc.
Yeah.
Is really amazing way of doing that in a decentralized way. That
Yeah.
doesn't involve like gatekeeping. No one can gatekeep
Yeah.
that league. It's defined by the NFT ownership.
I mean, it's also persuasive about crypto in a way that a lot of the garbage, like the pump fund shit on Solana, is not. And I like it because it indicates to me we're moving in a positive direction that the rest of the crypto space is overlooking. And I think people are going to see that much more easily when they start playing a game and they're like, wait a minute, this is a crypto application. This is like a distributed PKI, and no one can stop me from using this.
Yep.
Let's move on anyway. So we've talked about core network. We've talked about NFTs. We've talked about changes in app space that you may or may not have noticed. I don't think people have noticed the improvements to sending and receiving Saito because the threshold is really high. A bunch of stuff there. Let's move on. I think we got some questions. Maybe we can tackle.
So we sent out feelers to get some questions. We've distilled them down to about 5 here, so I think we'll just try and run through those quickly to wind up. Did you want to handle that first one, David?
The first one I see is, are there entities waiting for deployment on token persistence? I think this is a question about like third-party nodes. Like we say, we're expecting September 1st. One of the big changes is we're not expecting that third parties are going to need to be running servers because we've had dynamic module compilation, which totally liberates that. And with NFT support, I think a lot of the activities that people want to do, they'll be able to run it on our infra. I think the community is aware of people who want to build.
Yeah.
We know what we want to build with it, and we know the applications that we're working on.
Yeah.
If you are a third-party entity who wants to build, maybe this is a good opportunity to say that the clock is ticking on reaching out to us and getting support so we can get you running on September 1st.
Yep.
But we're happy to put effort into making sure that things are working smoothly. That's part of what's going to need to happen from
those are the roadmap steps for post April 30 basically is all of that stuff. So we're keen to be engaging with people to have real use cases. It's way easier to write documentation when you're answering someone's question than when you're trying to think what that question would be. It's much easier to build tools for developers if they've got a need and you can fix it for them rather than wondering what they might want.
Bear in mind, though, that infra-wise, I mean, we're much closer to a network where people don't even need to run servers for it to be valuable, which is kind of surprising because I wasn't expecting us to be this far along.
Well, I kind of see it a little bit differently to you, and it kind of ties into this next question, so I might hop on that. I kind of see it as decoupling the need for the application developer to be a node operator and for those two things to be joined, right? So what it means is anyone can write applications that can be deployed on any node that supports dynamically compiled modules, and that means that people can come in. If people can provide infra that's useful, cheaper, in a better location, easier to use than we can, there's profit in it for them because anyone can just drag their apps across and put them there. And it's really aiming at that. We're not running infra because we want to get some kind of lock on it. We're doing it to make it possible to grow things on the network and making it possible for, like as David says, from September 1, people to just run nodes and offer them as infrastructure to anybody who's developing apps and not have to have like a plan that involves both an app and a new community, et cetera, et cetera.
Here's a question
really powerful.
The question I'm seeing here is whether we're expecting the number of nodes to increase more token persistence. I mean, the answer is yes. I'd say it's a more complicated answer because it depends on what the business model is, right? Like we've seen some people, they're like, why don't you charge money for more of this? And because if we did it, we would be able to push fees up on the other hand, what we'd be doing is crushing the desire for a lot of the organic use we're getting to use the network.
Yeah.
So our strategy, we're conceptualizing the app suite more as a freemium play, where things like video call, poker, the arcade, all of this, like in our infrastructure, we are going to be providing that free or at low cost. And as long as the network has the capacity, and we'll get to the TPS, we'll give you some stats in a bit. As long as the network has some capacity, we feel no pressure to actually start charging people for that kind of stuff. Why do it? Our business model, not business model, but what we're likely to do to try to create incentives for node operation application is that, if people need Saito to do things like purchase community NFTs, which will be purchasable on infra in the same way as anyone else's, we're likely just to jack up the price of the Saito. So it's like you've got two ways of buying it. You can buy it off chain and move it on, that's fine. Or you can buy it from us at a significant premium to market price because that's what we value it as. And my expectation is that I'm kind of thinking like that's probably going to be one of the earlier ways that people will deal with incentivization, because like, unless you're building your own apps, I don't think people, maybe if you're building a market, maybe you can white brand video call and spin it off with some small changes. Unless you're going to do dev work, you're not likely to be able to charge people for stuff that the main server is offering for free. What you can do is you can integrate it with stuff, and the tools that people use to buy Saito, they can buy it from you. They don't need to buy it from us. So there's a combination of business models in here for people who want to approach infrastructure provision as a commercial service. And it depends on network growth. The more growth we have, the more pressure we have towards on-chain fees. The more pressure we have towards on-chain fees, the more expensive, the cheaper it is, the more profitable it is to run infra. So there's a bunch happening. I just encourage people, remember that it's not like Bitcoin. It's not like running a node. You're going to be mining, and that's going to make money, and that's your incentive. The incentive is to be running applications, providing value, kind of showing you how we think it's going to be done. And that's why, like the app suite, we're in this pretty much 3 to 4 month push before token persistence, where we're trying to debug things and get everything working.
Simplify them and get them working simply and smoothly.
You have anything to add there? I mean,
no, I think that covers it.
I think people don't realize the arbitrage opportunity, which is that for normies, like one of the small changes we're making, just added in, the way that people get and start using Saito apps is by URL. Because it doesn't involve wallets, you just share a URL. That means if you're running a server, the advantage you have in the ability to share that URL is the captive attention of onboarding, which means that if there's a use case and an application use case that does involve purchasing Saito, that's kind of where lock-in can happen. Richard, you got anything to add?
No, I think that's good, and there's a bit more to come in that when we get to the stats, because that kind of bears out the kind of cost versus profit side of things. So maybe we just keep going through the questions. There's really two left.
Next question I've got is about forecasts on usage. The answer we've got is we've seen about 5% in the last month. It's organic gameplay. It's great to see, and the beautiful thing is it's organic. And it's happening in a bear market where everyone else is like, oh, what's happening? Why is our volume down? Unless they're literally dumping tens of millions in inflation. So
I mean, it's really cool, and it's good to see the various ways you can keep track of it. We don't track users. It's definitively the point of what we're doing is not running around like finding DAUs and trying to put a product team on squeezing $1 out of them. But given that we can see things like people popping up in chat asking for a game and seeing new identicons and new names, seeing more of them registering a personality, seeing more of them posting, that growth is really encouraging.
We've seen that for a while. We're seeing a slight acceleration.
Yeah.
So we're hoping it keeps up because we're hoping it's a word of mouth thing. One way you can help if you're here is if you want to help Saito come and play these apps, look at them and come out with suggestions.
Yeah.
We really need people to be doing a breakdown of apps. The reason for this is, as you can tell, we're super busy.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is problems get identified, someone works on it, and then they go to the next burning house on fire, right?
Yeah.
And like Settlers, it took us a while to get Settlers to the point it joined the top ranks, but and I still think there's like the road click target for me is still problematic, but there are issues where if somebody flags them, we're like, yeah, you're right, we should fix that, and then the change happens, and it's like a 1% change, but you get 5 of those in, and you hit the point where there's someone who says, "Oh, I'm actually going to invite."
They didn't spend any of their game time in a state of being annoyed or whatever, which is enough to knock them off. Yeah, absolutely. I think people.
It still bothers me because there's info display coupled with action, but. And the other thing also maybe to flag is that a lot of the things that are usable that are driving growth, long-term users will know we've been working on them for a while. So like it's probably not an accident that TS is one of the big ones, since our first version of that was 2019 that it did?
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that longevity and stuff is something that people may not immediately grok anyone who's coming from a crypto space where people are looking at DeFi and so forth, and everything is accelerated by dumping money into it, basically. We're building a community that is proof against crypto markets, right? It's not interested in crypto markets, etc. So if we can build a user base who are paying fees that grows organically and isn't specifically based on the fact that the market is going one way or the other to justify its engagement, etc. That's something that no one in the space has, and it's a platform.
It's kind of funny. Like looking, have you been reading the ETH stuff on Twitter where they're like, "Oh, we need to change focus into applications," and it's like, yeah, no shit.
Yeah,
you know, there needs to be a reason for people to use the network, and.
Well, and people are, yes, a reason to use it. People are also starting to sort of look at, the scamtopia that crypto has been and asking themselves, like the ETH devs, what has been built on ETH that's actually worthwhile, worthy. And they come up with MakerDAO, and there's a few things. And ETH is a titan. There are things. It's not like there's nothing there. But if you look at it as a percentage of what's going on, it's seen as an afterthought. And in fact, this is what people are digging out from the rubble of all of the scams that have gone on ETH and saying, here is a valid, worthy thing, and it's something I think we've had insight into. We've been driving for a very long time. If you can build applications people genuinely want to use, and they can have all the properties of decentralization without people needing to sacrifice for that, then you're onto something.
Let me take this question and turn it into not a sales pitch, but a request.
Yeah.
We're saying we're getting 5% organic growth in the last month. What that tells me is that the games are good enough that people are telling other people and or playing more. What that tells me is that if you have not played Twilight Struggle, if you have not played Settlers of Satoa, if you have not played poker, if you have not played Here I Stand, 1, you may be missing a good experience. I think you're missing a good experience. But 2, help us figure out how to get that 5% to 10%. Because that's how we get current transaction volume month on month up to 100,000, 200,000, 500,000 into the millions. The network's going to support the traffic, and at that point, the rest of the crypto space is literally not going to know what's going to hit it, because we're going to be a major chain before they even know what fucking routing work is. So, come pay attention to this stuff and help us figure out how to improve the stuff people are using. It's a real need that we have from the community. And it's one of the reasons you'll notice also we're putting work into new applications that fit the needs of the people who are already coming, because we can look and see, well, if these people are using Saito, let's give more of a reason. Next question, TPS.
Yeah, so this is a question from Ross Green, who we love, who's always keeping us on our toes and interested in what we're doing. He kind of asked it in terms of like, are there any public metrics we can give people? And
he's shy about asking about TPS.
Come at him with it. But he also points out like he learned that like 85% apparently of Solana's transactions are just governance votes, right? So what have we learned? I mean, the performance testing and the pressure testing we've been doing is in a way like, testing for volume capability itself. It's not designed to do that, but it gives us insight. So
one of the consequences, how big can the blocks get, and how fast can they be before the network dies?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is, and I mean, the cool thing is we've also got a variety of ways of throwing traffic into the system that, like it's so easy to spoof TPS numbers because if you create a very steady stream of exactly the same thing, it's way easier for the software to deal with than a bunch of different looking transactions of different sizes and different in bursts, etc. We can do that because we have things like games. But the headline on what we've learned is that on a really scrawny node, like this is a $5 or $10 a month DigitalOcean VPS, we're getting about 150 TPS before on one core before the it runs out of time to produce the block on my laptop, which is an 11th gen i5. It's more like 500 TPS. That varies a little bit with. I've been testing on shorter chain lengths, which actually limit that as well, because you're doing a lot more rebroadcasting, right? You've got all the transactions to reconsider, right? So those numbers may be sort of not sound like the 20 trillion or whatever chains claim, but the big thing to get your head around there is we're doing that for fractions of a cent, for tiny fractions of a cent per block, right? This node is only costing $10 a month to run, which means all a node operator would need to do is collect $11 in fees in a month, and they've hit profitability. It's not like it's a $20,000 deal to get one of these up, and then you start being profitable after that. So it's much more conducive to people building and getting stuff done and entering, and it will obviously scale even without any optimization, which we haven't even really started on yet, because you just have to throw more cores at it.
The nice thing to me about seeing those is that it was better than I was expecting, because we're looking essentially at it's kind of unoptimized,
No, it's nothing to
optimize. So there's clearly even, at maximum scale, what you get is you divide up what the hardware does. So you have a network-facing node that's just dealing with the bandwidth, and you have another node on the back end that's like, okay, I'm going to preload the blocks into memory and pre-analyze them to figure out transactions need to be. That's like the industrial scale at massive scale.
There's even more stuff we could do where you could take all of the financial, like just the payment transactions, and hand them to one core to handle in one way, and all of the data ones put them somewhere else because they're bigger, they need more signing, etc. So you could do a lot to break up the workload and make it many times faster. It's in no way optimized at the moment. It literally just, when it's finished one thing, it starts the next, and it does some waiting and stuff like that in between. So this is very pleasing for Zero.
So we can play the games other people play too. The TPS numbers you're reading elsewhere, it's literally, theoretically, what do we think the max capacity is if we assume this and we assume the network is flat out. When we do that with our own testing, we've got a ton of space to spare for growth.
Yeah.
Let's move on. We had one more question on Red Square, I think, about Realms. What's happening with that?
Yep.
I haven't paid any attention to Realms because we're working on the NFT stuff. I think if we do the dev, probably use Cursor AI for some of that. If anybody wants to help with that, it's a community project, by the way. Don't forget this. Red Square is also a community project. You're going to freebie work from us. We could use help with people conceptualizing what the board looks like. We got the cards. What does the board look like? Okay, where's the layout? Where do things go? Like the design of the table.
It's
the poker.
Yeah, like one of the pleasures of that Magic type game is spreading it all over the table and the visuals of the cards and things, and that's a real challenge to contract into a visual space that's the size of a monitor. So there's a lot, to get it to work, but also convey the kind of interest and coolness of the game is something we'd love to help with.
It's basic stuff. Anybody is welcome to come. Otherwise, we're going to be evaluating this. In the next section, we're gonna deal with how to help, I think, and maybe here we'll talk a bit about generally how to help, including on applications like Realms. Yeah. So the best thing about the how to help section is we're so close to token persistence now, we can be very specific.
Yeah.
First, it's kind of been open on help us improve consensus, analyze things. I don't think people have felt a sense of urgency. One of the reasons we focused on time is to give people the chance to do this, because we wanted outside advice and feedback on best design structures. And one of the weaknesses is we haven't really had that from mainstream crypto. So fuck mainstream crypto, let's just replace them. What this means is we've got about 4 months for serious consensus work before it gets difficult.
Yeah.
We could still use advice and suggestions on ways to improve security at low transaction fee volume. The approach that we're using, called block staking, is people are going to be affixing Saito to blocks to propose them.
Yep.
And what that means is that if anyone does a joyride or attacks the network, we, as a core economic operator, will be saying, this is our tolerance for this. At some point, we will fork our economic activity off the chain. And that it means that if someone basically is a malicious joyrider on the network, it's going to cost them probably about $200 million. We would love to increase this various ways, ideas on dynamic slashing. Anything you've got, ideas about consensus, now's the time.
Well, even just coming and learning Saito consensus and auditing the code, like having a read through the Rust code base and spotting anything for us, like that's actually really helpful. And like David says, there's only 3 months really before where it's not impossible after that to make consensus changes, but they need coordination between everybody who's running a node, and they need. Yeah,
it gets more difficult, and the willingness of the team to say, oh, well, this theoretical idea is something we should look at.
Right.
The hurdle for us saying, yeah, okay, let's experiment with that and play it out becomes much harder. Yep. If you've been, we know some people have been thinking about scripting, speed up. If you want to see scripting, multi-sig, that kind of stuff, speed up. We don't have the time to deal with that stuff before token persistence. First, suggestions on improving consensus. 2, I'd say help us focus on what's driving usage. Richard, you want to?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of aspects to that. We kind of glanced across a few of them before. Obviously, big ones are things like anyone who's got any interest in creating NFTs, trading, selling, integrating them into any kind of applications, etc. Hit us up sooner rather than later, because we can support you. We can talk about the capabilities maybe a little earlier than you've seen them, walk you through how things are looking. That's going to be really great both ways. We can help you out and we can learn at the same time.
Yeah.
Similarly, I think just looking at games, things like Realms UI design we've talked about, but also poker, come in, trial, open tables, etc. Get us feedback on how that's working for you. And think about things like what's going to make this a good thing to invite my friends to. Like, what would make Saito Poker Night work for me and my buddies? Those sorts of things are actually really helpful for us, and trialing it and then coming back with feedback and saying, this happened, or this worked really well, but that was annoying. That's the kind of stuff we can really use from here.
I think people also, sometimes there will be questions like, what about X? What about Y? So maybe it's important to communicate to people what we're working on. We're working on the stuff that we see people using. So if someone, like there was a question about the Block Explorer, I'm like, well, I'm not going to worry about, who cares about the Block Explorer? If you're a dev, it's fine. The stuff that we see people using are the games. So like the NFT tools and stuff are going to be focused on game integration. We've got some additional games. Red Square curation, because it's kind of a longer play, but we are seeing people use it. Video calls got some bugs with 3-person calls. I think people might have run into them where it's like, if you refresh, someone joins and they're black for one person and they've got connections to 2 others because it's peer-to-peer. So stuff like that, just making sure that the stuff that people are using really works as a first-class application on the internet. Because for onboarding, the way it works, we share a link, people come in, they don't necessarily know it's crypto, they get exposed to it. So making sure that stuff works so that we can spin up the crypto integration, like Saito integration with video call, pay per minute, pay per call, that kind of stuff. Those are the things we're going to be focusing on after token persistence goes live, because the scope of the tools that we're using are now expanding to include a first-class native token that can engage with the app.
I think as well, just hit us up with if you've got ideas or if you think of things that would be good ways to promote or get people to engage with the project and the apps. I'll use eGold Game Nights as an example. They have become a thing. They're a constant source of transaction volume. They've got their own little community now. I mean, that was the focus. There was on the kind of connection. We know people in the eGold community. It was a focus for doing it, but it doesn't have to be crypto related. It could be anything where you
Yeah.
think a group of people might use video call, or a group of people might want to play a certain game, or you might have a
Mhm.
tournament with old classmates, whatever it is. Uh, Feel free to get going on those and hit us up if you want support on anything there, because that's
Yeah.
also just gold for us. Yeah.
It may be because we yell at people who give us suggestions, but please give us suggestions. Like I've noticed with the Eagle stuff, people are sometimes like, oh, a little bit timid and like, oh, well, it would be better if this was fixed. And it's
Mm.
actually, yes, please. It's sometimes hard for us to do that, and sometimes you'll hit a dev who's like just been working on that problem for a couple of days,
Yeah.
and they're like, but it's much better. Um, Things like that, like the
Yeah.
eGold game nights. It's not just, don't just think about using the applications as it's creating a transaction that is using the network. What matters for us is that onboarding growth. Are we getting a 5% increase this month? Are we
Yeah.
getting a 3% increase? Is it cumulative?
Yeah.
Right? So that's one of the really important things we're trying to get out of things like eGold Game Night. It's looking at the eGold community coming over and being like, look, where are these guys getting frustrated? How can we make this a better experience for them?
Mhm.
So that like the eGold people are like, yeah, let's set up our own tournament, or let's set up our own game night. Um, Moving on, application usability feedback reviews. That was kind of that.
Yeah, I
We
think
got.
we've gone through that. Yeah.
Let me touch briefly on academics conferences and updates and give people an update on that. As I've said before, we've done more work. I've been doing a bunch of writing, various kinds of papers. We've been working with some academics. The academics have hit a stumbling block, which is um, they know how Saito works. They can't find a problem with it, but they don't know how to model it because it's dynamic, because of the dynamic probabilities. So they've kind of hit a section where they're like, well, we think it's incentive compatible, but we don't know how to write a paper about that. And the reason for this is that in computer science, all of the tools that people are using to write these papers, they're assuming that the probability of producing a block is fixed for nodes in the network. So you say it's fixed to your amount of hash, it's fixed to your stake. We can use this, we can model people's utility. With Saito, there's an entirely different strategic layer. If you watch the presentation at ETH at Denver, we actually pointed this out. We pointed out that computer science is modeling the strategy space as if the only choice is what fee you pay. Whereas in reality, it's a two-part choice. It's whether you sell your transaction privately or you broadcast it generally. And then, given that choice, you have the choice of the fee that you pay. This complexity makes it difficult to model. So we're running into some issues there. On the other hand, the other papers that we've written, we got the presentation of ETH. That stuff's going well. Flagging this because again, we're approaching token persistence. It's not a time that's running out, but this is the time to make the push.
Yeah.
We've For mainstream crypto conferences, things like like the Dubai, all of these things. It's really interesting watching what's happening. They're basically turning into shitcoin fests. And if you go and you see the people that are doing the booths, the marketing is how quickly can we liquidate your crypto and get into your bank account? And that's like one big theme. The other big theme is like, we're in a game, buy this token. We're in a different space where we think the positive directions to engage with these kind of conferences are side events with gaming. So if you are in a town where there's going to be a crypto conference and you want to help market Saito, we think the way to do it that is actually most productive, given what we're seeing in the industry, is
Mm.
let's set up a side event. Let's give people Saito, and let's get them playing Settlers. Let's get them playing poker at a bar with beer. Um, we're happy to support these kind of activities, and it's not something you need us for because it can be community driven and organic. Um, so reach out to us for this. For the academic stuff, there are two conferences really that are going to matter this year. There's one in June, which involves the transaction fee mechanism. People that are just like, they're just they're kind of, they're wrong, but they're well intentioned. And then there's the Stanford Blockchain Conference, which is now the Science of Blockchain Conference at Berkeley this year. So maybe that's part of the name change. Um, both of those we think would be useful academically. Again, we're writing the papers, we've got things to say, but if you want us to be participating, you've got to, we could use help on this.
Yep.
And that's, we can ask the questions, we can point out the problems. Like, I can be on Twitter and scream all day saying, the choice of whether you sell your transaction means there's a preference for the value you're getting from selling it. It's not just the fee. I can do that all day. It doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to push academia. If you want to see us at those conferences, if you're connected, it's a great opportunity. We've got a bunch of papers. We've got a bunch of things we can talk about. You can share the ETH video. The ETH video was really well received by the academics there, because I think they're also kind of irritated with what's happening in the mainstream POS space. We could use help with that. So do reach out, do engagement. And, you can do engagement on Twitter too. I've seen Ross Green has been asking people a lot of probing questions, and I don't know if he's noticed. I've noticed that people are incapable of answering him.
Yep.
So it's this weird thing where the more people know about Saito, the more they're able to basically ask questions that other people have to ignore because they don't have answers. Participate, push, because the reality is that we're ahead of the game. People don't know it yet, and they're going to. And it helps us the sooner they know it.
Yep.
Or they'll know it in a year, we'll figure it out. So in review, how to help, consensus changes.
Yep.
The clock's ticking, especially anyone who's been looking into on-chain scripting, multi-sig, that kind of stuff. Application usage, creative, help us find the bugs, the problems, figure out what's stopping you and frustrating you, so we can prioritize the best, so we can prioritize getting the adoption curve up.
Yep.
Applications review, part of that, the academic stuff. Did I miss anything? Conferences, side events?
No, I think that's most of it. Yeah, conferences, side events, and any ideas you have for activities, etc.
Yeah. And also, be aware, it's kind of weirdly, the outreach stuff, it's weirdly proselytizing. In some ways, it feels like a religion. You're going and you're sharing truth with someone.
Yeah.
And most people are really unreceptive to it because, like the Pharisees in the temple, they've got their business model,
Yeah. They're clinging desperately to the remaining shreds at the moment of that business model.
Yeah. But, we are a cult in a way. So
a friendly one.
We're a cult that enjoys playing settlers, making video calls.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think we should probably wrap up. We're just about on the hour. So thanks everyone who stuck with the video this far. Glad to be updating you on where we're at, what we're working on, and how you can get involved.
Yeah, and tolerate Red Square might be a bit flaky for the rest of the week.
We'll get it there.
But post there, we'll see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone.